In this episode of the podcast, we're talking to my friend, Pei Ketron. Now, Pei is a photographer slash educator. She cut her teeth on wedding and portrait photography before kind of finding her niche in world and travel photography, where she developed a significant following and name. She boasts over 750,000 followers on Instagram, and she transitioned recently full-time into a position with Adobe as their Lightroom community manager. I love this conversation that we're about to have. We're going to talk about kind of Pei's experience in going into photography, her background in special education, where she taught for over 10 years. We're going to talk about how she made her way from weddings and portrait into travel photography. Then we're going to talk about backgrounds and ethnicities and racism and all sorts of different kind of social justice problems that are going on today, among a whole bunch of other stuff. This is going to be a great episode. You're going to dig it. Let's go ahead and dive in. This is the TSS podcast. It's a place for authentic conversations to uncover the stupid, simple truths that help us succeed and find happiness. Welcome to Think Stupid Simple. Pei, thank you for joining me.
Of course, I'm happy to. It's always nice to get caught up.
I know, and I feel like this is probably going to be the first time I've really had a good chance to get to know you.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's the first time we are going to have a solid one-to-one conversation.
It is, and we've known each other now for several years. I would say 2 years. Was it 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was 2018, September that we met. Yeah.
So for context, for our listeners, I met Pei at the Profoto Alaska conference, where we spent the entire 30-second ride of an elevator ride, getting to know each other. What did you take away from that first experience, Pei?
Well, I thought you were very friendly and very personable, and that I should spend more time talking to you, but there were so many people to meet and speak to that weekend. We just never connected again. So it was kind of like, all right, well, I'll, connect with him online and see what happens. And that was about it. But I mean,
what you said
honestly,
in the later half of that was essentially that I was not important enough to get to know, but I'm going to dismiss that. And I'm going to focus on just the first piece, which was, you thought I was a nice guy. I like that.
I thought you were a nice guy. But actually, my favorite thing about that interaction was that it's probably my favorite ever intro that I've ever done with anyone or had with anyone. Because
wait, tell me what?
Well, because you were like, "Hi, I'm Pi," and I was like, "Hi, I'm Pei," and we kind of both paused, like,
wait, is that a 3-letter name too?
Is she messing with me? Is she messing with me? So, yeah, I thought that was hilarious because it's not often, that me as somebody named Pei gets to meet someone named Pi and actually in a serious way and have a conversation. So
I genuinely thought you were messing with me because I was coming off of I'd just spent several hours with Jessica Kobesi and Brandon Wolfel, and I swear, I've never felt older in my entire life, and those guys were messing with me nonstop. So we get in the elevator, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm Pi," and you're like, "I'm Pei," and I was like, "For God's sake, another one? You're just gonna make seriously?" And then I found out that you were serious. So I thought you were messing with me.
I'm serious, and I'm also an old lady in this, like an old, fogey group when it comes to some of these trips and stuff. So, yeah.
Right? Wasn't that okay? So that was the trip where my eyes were opened to realizing. See, if you're a photographer, I wouldn't even say I've been a photographer that long, right? So I've only been in this industry for maybe a little more than a decade. But from what I understood, you came into photography, you either went kind of a wedding and portrait route and you marketed yourself directly towards clients, or you went towards a commercial route, advertising route, and you kind of marketed through agencies and you found an agent and kind of did that. 2 years ago, which is probably a decade behind the actual reality, but 2 years ago is when I discovered that there is now a new pathway which includes just gaining a large following on social media and being directly connected to the brands.
Yeah. And the interesting thing for me is that I've been shooting for 20 years now. I think I'm about to hit the 20-year mark. I always say I started January of 2001. So I'm about to hit the
January of
20-year mark.
2001. Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
So, yeah. So, I can talk about that if you're interested in later. But the interesting thing that I wanted to mention is that I started shooting in 2001 and had a whole separate career that was not photography. I was an elementary school special ed teacher for 10 years while I did photography on the side. And
those numbers don't make sense, Pei. I thought you were like 30 years old. These numbers don't make sense at all. What?
I know. See, I told you I was an old lady in the group as well. So I just celebrated my 40th birthday a week ago yesterday.
Congratulations, my friend.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a big deal. So I started shooting when I was 20, like a month after I turned 20. Wow. I studied abroad in Prague, picked up a camera to, document my time in Prague, and it actually turned into legit photography back then, but I was still learning and, didn't know anything. But to go back to your earlier comment, I started photography the old-fashioned way, where my foot into the photography world was shooting first portraits and then weddings for people that I knew. So that was the industry that I was in. And I started that in probably 2004, doing portrait work, 6 through 10. I think I did a lot of weddings. And then in 2010, Instagram came out. And then I switched from that traditional model of like finding clients through the people I knew around me to this new model of utilizing social media to grow a following and get connected through clients in other ways. So I went from old school to new school kind of seamlessly, and inadvertently I was just in the right place at the right time.
See, I knew it. I was 8 years behind. You were 2010. You were already doing this.
Yeah. It's weird.
There's so much here that I want to unpack. Okay.
I know. And I want to also say something also. So you said you felt old, on that trip to Alaska.
Yes.
I think in early 2018. So I sort of started to like pull away from the Instagram influencer, photography work. Honestly, I'm just I was like reshifting my focus career-wise. So probably starting around 2017, 2018, I was looking for other options. But in early 2018, I did a job. It was for Black Forest gummies. They flew me to New Zealand. They were filming a commercial, like an actual television spot. And I was one of the still photographers on set. So I was capturing images of this shoot so that they could use for advertisements and whatnot. So it was me and one other photographer, and the other photographer was this young guy who had a massive following on Instagram.
Yeah.
But he was, I think, 22 at the time. And I looked at him and I was like, oh my God, when I started on Instagram and I was building a following and first starting to do Instagram influencer work, you were 13. And I was like, oh my God, I feel really, really old right now. So I feel like those situations are happening more and more often these days.
Yes. Well, it sounds like you were also an 80s child. So I was born in 1980 as well.
You were born the same year I was born?
Yeah. Well, you were born the same year I was born. Okay.
I followed you. Wait, what month were you born?
I was in May. Where were you?
Okay. Yeah. December. Yeah. I just had my birthday.
See, so you were born the same year I was born.
But I had to. I mean, you were setting such a trend. I had to join in. Couldn't wait till 1981.
Trying to catch up to you ever since. So, okay.
I have to share with you. Sorry,
Yes.
can I
No, no,
share
no.
this with
Tell me,
you?
tell me, tell
It's
me, tell me.
my, it's completely unrelated, but my favorite bumper sticker I've ever seen is a bumper sticker that says, "There they go. I must follow them, for I am their leader." So your comment there kind of reminded me of that.
I very much like that bumper sticker. Now, do you have bumper stickers on your car?
No, no. I mean, it's not like a thing that I want to do to my car. I just saw one day in a parking lot that I found entertaining. And this was, I don't know, 15 years, almost 20 years ago, probably. So, before the age of smartphones, I would have taken a photo of it if I had a smartphone at the time, but I didn't. So it
I
just
am one to
exists
appreciate
in
bumper
here.
stickers too, but I am not one to put them on my own car. There was a saying that I heard a while back that kind of went along the lines of kind of the more bumper stickers you have, it relates to your level of crazy. And I found that
I can see that.
to have some modicum of truth to it. But going back to, okay, you gave us this story. This is a long format podcast, my friend. I mean, you basically gave us a 12-hour long documentary film condensed into about 2 minutes. So let's, I assume you have the time to unpack this. You have the time, right?
I have I have time.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
So special ed. So I assume when you started in photography, that's when you were doing special education as a career.
So when I started in photography, well, I started taking photos when I was in college. So I was 20 and a junior in college studying
Okay.
abroad. So that's when I started taking photos.
Okay.
And then when I started teaching right after college, I was going to grad school at the same time.
Yeah.
So I was getting a master's in special education and teaching at a private school for kids with autism.
Okay.
And I was doing photography as a hobby and taking photos on the side. I would also bring my camera in to take photos of the students, of course. And whenever I got a good photo, I would print it out and send it home to the parents because it's actually really difficult to get great portraits of kids with special needs
Yeah.
because as a photographer just coming in, you may not know the student, you may not know what makes them laugh, you might not recognize when they're happy versus when they're upset,
For sure.
or like when they're about to be triggered in some way. So as the teacher working with them every day, I knew the kids intimately. I knew all of their quirks, their ins and outs. I could get them to smile. And so these photos that I was sending home to the parents were probably some of the better photos that they'd ever had taken of their kids. Then they would say, "Hey, actually, can we hire you to do a photo shoot? Because we don't have that many great photos of our children." So that's how I turned it into a paid thing. I would just start doing paid photo shoots for the students that I had in my own classroom.
That's crazy. And at what point, I guess what was kind of the motivation, the drive to go full time into photography? Was that kind of, did you find that to be the true thing that you wanted to follow, or what was that?
Well, it was a long journey. So I was doing these portrait sessions that then turned into weddings because some of the parents of my students were either getting remarried or my coworkers, my co-teachers were getting married and they wanted me to photograph their weddings. So I went from portrait photography into wedding photography. And then the great thing about wedding photography was that it enabled me to buy any camera gear. I could justify any camera gear purchase I made, right?
Yeah.
Because I was actually bringing in income through it. But it also funded one trip for me every year. So I
Okay.
didn't, I went back to Taiwan. I was born in Taiwan and grew up in Arizona,
Oh, I didn't know that.
on Navajo Reservation. So that's another story we can talk about as
What?
well. But I didn't like my family didn't have a lot of money growing up. So my mom and I would go back to Taiwan every year, but we didn't, as a family do much traveling. Like we stayed put because we couldn't afford to travel. So once I got old enough, once I got to be an adult, I had a job. I was teaching, I was doing photography on the side. I utilized whatever money I was earning to not just buy camera gear, but to fund a single trip abroad every year. So during the summer, I would reserve, a couple weeks or a week or so to take a trip abroad. And of course, during those trips, I would take photos. And so this is really where, to answer your question, I am still on topic.
I love it.
I had these like travel photographs, and then I had all of these, wedding and portrait photographs. And my clients were always happy, but the photos that I took that would make people kind of stop in their tracks and say, "Oh my God, this is incredible. You're really good at this," were the travel photos and not the wedding photos. So
Interesting.
I think once I realized that, and I also realized that I was, more interested in travel than shooting weddings.
Yeah.
I did love it for a time, and I think that I can attribute it to a lot of my growth as a photographer. Because as a wedding photographer, you have to be good at portrait photography, event photography, landscape photography, night photography, event photography, macro photography, all of these things, food photography. So
Yeah.
I learned a lot as a wedding photographer, then I could apply that to travel photography and the other things that I was doing. So the goal for a while I was teaching and doing wedding photography on the side was to eventually, leave teaching, because my wedding photography business was so strong that I could make a living doing that. And then I had maybe like a, I was going to say midlife crisis moment, but that's more for now and not for 20 years ago, 15 years ago. But I had this, throughout this journey, I was like, actually, maybe wedding photography isn't the route that I should be going, and maybe I should be pursuing travel photography. But at the time, that was before social media was really a thing. That was pre-2010, pre-Instagram, early Facebook. I probably didn't even have Facebook at the time because it was still locked and only for college students, and I was
Yeah.
already too old for it. So social media wasn't really a thing. I had no idea how to connect with clients. I had no idea how to become a travel photographer. So I just stuck with teaching for a few more years and kind of phased out the wedding photography to just like a few weddings a year to help pay for gear. And then Instagram came in, and it was just kind of a natural flow where I didn't have to do too much. I just started posting photography on Instagram. And by the time Instagram came out, I'd already been a photographer for 10 years. So I didn't have to learn photography and social media. I just had to learn social media, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So what age were you then when you transitioned full-time into photography? What time point was that?
Okay. Yes, I didn't fully answer your question. So I left teaching in 2012.
Okay.
So I taught from 2002 to 2012. And the reason I ended up leaving teaching was I wasn't actually ready. I fully admit I wasn't ready as a photographer because I didn't have enough business and clients and work to do it. But my partner at the time, he got a job in New York. So we were living in San Francisco or in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And he got a job in New York. So we moved to New York together. But my teaching credential, and I had also gotten a credential to be a school administrator. So I had a teaching credential and an admin credential. Those were both only good in the state of California. There's some reciprocity, but there's a big, long process.
Yeah.
So essentially, I moved to New York, and my teaching credentials weren't good at that time. I had to wait and go through this long process. So when I first moved to New York, I was like, well, this is a good opportunity for me to give photography a try, right? It's as good a time as any for me to launch into a photography career or to see if I can make it work, because I am not working as a teacher at the moment. And it was not easy. It was not a easy thing to do, because also the people that I knew who were hiring me were all in the Bay Area, and suddenly I was in New York and had to meet new people and find new clients, and I had to scramble and do all sorts of different kinds of work. Like I was second shooting weddings, which I'd never done before either. I was, people were outsourcing their photo editing to me, so I was doing some of that. I nannied for a while. That didn't go well. That was not a good fit for me.
That was not a good fit.
That was not a good fit for me. And eventually, I would say, because I was in that first wave of influencers that came out of Instagram.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, nobody knew what to do. It was like the wild, wild west, uncharted territory. Brands weren't paying like Instagrammers to do things because they
Yep.
didn't realize what all it would entail, and that there's like, you know, like nobody knew what kind of money and what kind of influence could be had and made in this
For sure.
exchange. So a lot of the early gigs from Instagram were unpaid travel gigs. So we'll fly you to Jordan for 8 days and show you around all the best places and things and food that our country has to offer. And all you have to do is take and post photos and talk about how cool your experience is.
Yeah.
But we're not going to pay you. So that's kind of what, like, I started doing those. 2013 was the first gig I had like that.
Yeah.
So there was like that year, 2012 to 2013, where we were kind of all of us influencers on like Instagrammers were trying to figure out what to do, how to turn this into income. Yeah, so it wasn't an easy, I'd say maybe 2 years. The first 2 years were kind of rough because I wasn't bringing in enough money. But then it kind of exploded after that. But of course, as you know, by then I was like in my mid 30s and kind of wanting to shift in my own life and career to something a little bit more stable. I wanted to start a family, all that stuff. So yeah, I was freelancing for maybe 7 years
Uh-huh.
from, yeah, 2012 to 2019. That's when I went back to full-time work.
Yeah, it takes brands every time there's a new platform that comes up. It feels like it takes brands a few years to develop a strategy and actually allocate a budget towards
Yeah.
that thing. But now I do think that the trend is kind of getting a little bit quicker because the environment is changing so much that like
Yeah.
2-3 years you can completely miss movements. But that's
Yeah.
so interesting because during that time, from a social media perspective, Instagram is exploding. And what a lot of people didn't realize was that a lot of creative professionals, not just photographers, but cinematographers and artists and everything, designers, they didn't necessarily realize that the following was not indicative of income. So you would
Mhm.
have hundreds of thousands of people that follow these certain, and everybody wanted to be and emulate these many different influencers, which I know you and I both probably do not like that term, but everybody wants to kind of emulate. But most of these influencers early on, they're not making any money either.
Yeah.
So it created this very weird, I call it the Instagram bubble because I don't know any other social media platform that's kind of that similar in the sense of like Instagram was all about, it feels like to an extent, it's still about showing a lifestyle that doesn't exist, like one pretty picture after the next.
Yeah, it's the
And
highlights, right?
yeah,
Your highlight reel.
it's your life highlight reel that
Mhm.
doesn't exist in any way, shape, or form. Whereas
Yeah.
like Facebook has become the place to essentially have negative conversations and and
Let's
debate
talk
with people
politics
that
with
you
our
thought you knew.
relatives. Yeah.
Yes. And then you've got TikTok, which is just like, let's get on here and dick around a little bit.
Yeah, let's get on here and feel really old is really how it is. You're doing such a great job with TikTok, and I have not even tackled it because I am not ready.
It's because that's literally what it is. Let's get on here and screw around some.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I can do
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah.
can do
Yeah.
that and I can be happy doing that.
Yeah. I feel like, especially now as a new mom, I'm very limited in my time to just
Yes.
like mess around on the internet anymore. So I'm picking and choosing. I'm barely using Instagram anymore these days, as you've probably noticed. So yeah, it's been really interesting. But to go back to what you were saying earlier about, when Instagram was new and these brands were still trying to figure it out, I think a lot of people, the earliest companies to recognize potential with Instagram were travel companies.
Yeah.
So all of my early gigs, even if they were unpaid and then turned into paid gigs, they were all with either tourism boards, hotels, airlines.
Yeah.
So everything travel related. So that industry was really the first industry to recognize value in utilizing imagery to sell and, to access this new audience. So then also, especially early on, before analytics were as powerful as they are now, before, it's like before Instagram even offered the insights that they offer, before Iconosquare was around, before Hootsuite and Sprout Social and all of these places allowed you to access that more, like that deeper data about your audiences, it was really hard to figure out, what a brand's return on their investment was,
Yeah.
right? It's like, I'm gonna, sure, I'll pay, $10,000 to an Instagrammer to post these photos about their experiences, but how much is that driving customers in my direction as a business? And that was
Yeah.
hard to ascertain early on. And, like you were saying earlier, the numbers don't really equate to what people are earning, which
Hmm.
is, yes, somewhat true, but also, especially nowadays with the way the landscape has shifted so much over time, numbers also, like your follower count doesn't really equate to engagement either, right?
True.
Like still have a decent sized following, but my engagement rate is, I honestly don't know what it is, except that it's probably terrible, right? It's probably one of the lowest engagement rates out there because, I have all of these followers, and I put that in quotes because I think a lot of people who started following me early on because I was on the suggested user list don't use Instagram anymore. Like they've
Yeah.
moved on to other things, or they're only looking at stories, or they're, engaging with the platform so differently. And so it's just like it's a hollow number to look at.
No, for sure. It's a very interesting thing that the way that the platforms work in general. But then, like you said, engagement is probably the most valuable metric that one would have.
Mhm.
But so you at one point had 850,000 people on Instagram following, and I think we checked it a few minutes ago. You're at 750-ish, which is still a huge following.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I've noticed as well, so we got up to like 400,000 people on YouTube. This was like
Mhm.
several years ago, and then going through my divorce, I was like, I just can't. Like, I gotta like compartmentalize and figure out where I'm going to put my energy, and YouTube is not going to be one of those places. For
Yeah.
about 2 years, so this is might be like 4 or 5 years ago. For about 18 months ish, we kind of just left YouTube and let it do its thing, like and whatnot. So we come back to it like 2 years later, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to get going with this again. And the 400,000 metric actually ends up hurting us
Mhm.
because now we have 400,000 subscribers, but when the algorithm looks at it, they're no longer engaged subscribers. See, we left the platform too long. And now, like you said, your audience kind of moves on to other things. They move on to like kind of, so yes, we still have that number, but engagement is low. And because that engagement is low, our new content doesn't pick up because
Mhm.
then your overall percentage of engagement is down. So now you don't get recommended.
Yeah.
And I was like, for a long time, I was like, is this me? Do I just suck at this? So
Yeah.
6 months ago, I thought, I'm going to try a TikTok experiment and say, if I were to start this from the ground up and do it the way that I'm going to do, I love frameworks. I'm going to develop a framework for how an ideal post should go. Let's see if this is me or if this is like the platform shutting us down. And sure enough, it was 4 months before we passed 800,000 people on TikTok, and they're
Mhm.
highly engaged. And
Mhm.
I was like, okay, there's not only a lifespan to the actual platform itself, but then there's this living thing within your own community where
Mhm.
if you let that thing die, doesn't matter how many followers you have, it's really difficult to revive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like a garden that you have to tend to,
Yeah.
right? So it's like it falls apart when you're not there, posting and sharing and engaging with your audience. So it's, when I stopped posting as regularly when I went back to full-time work because I mean, for a number of reasons, like, one, I was really busy with the actual full-time job that I had, but also two, I didn't need to post on Instagram so much anymore, right? Because I
Yeah.
wasn't relying on that to be a part of my income. So once I stopped posting as often, obviously, fewer people are, people stop following,
Sure.
fewer people are looking because of the algorithm. Your stuff isn't getting surfaced as often. So um, yeah, then it becomes a cycle of like, well, the reward is less, so I'm going to post less, but then it just kind of feeds into that negative, like, losing interest in this platform kind of cycle. So honestly, yeah, Instagram is not, I mean, it's still probably one of the places I'm most active, but I think that's a lot of like, sharing and consuming stories and then just having conversations with people, because that's where I have so many connections.
Yeah, makes
But
sense.
yeah, as a place to share my work as a photographer, it's for me, honestly, I'm just not shooting and sharing that much these days because I'm busy working and with my baby. So yeah,
Well,
it's kind
tell
of
me
like
about
an
that. Tell,
afterthought.
tell
Yeah.
me about being a new mom. This was your first, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us all about your baby. I want to hear.
Uh, you probably have seen far too much already, but
I love the pictures.
yeah. I mean, that's actually where, while we're talking Instagram, I'm spending more time on my son's Instagram feed. I have a little baby Instagram account that's private where I share photos of him
Yeah.
to friends and family. And it's just more fun. And, I post almost every day. I don't edit I mean, I edit some things, but I just like throw things on there that are, imperfect and non-curated. And it's casual and fun the way Instagram was when it first started. But yeah, my son is turning 1 next week,
That's crazy.
which is crazy. We haven't gone very many places or done very many things outside of the home in this year because he was born in early January. And by the time I started feeling good enough and confident enough to kind of take him out and about in the world shut down because of COVID. So
Yeah.
yeah, he was about 2 months old when everything shut down again. So, we've just been laying low, doing stuff at home, but he's incredible. It's so fun. Even if you have had experience with other kids, which I haven't had too much of in terms of like small babies.
Hmm.
I don't have a lot of experience in my life with other people's small babies. My sister has a baby, but she lives in North Carolina. So I would see her maybe 3 times a year, 2 to 3 times a year. And, you kind of, you think that you understand before you become a parent, you think you understand why it's so special and what that bond will be like. And I know everybody always says this, but it's completely 100% true. Like you don't understand what it feels like until you experience it.
Yeah.
Just this idea of seeing this baby every single day and seeing him or her change and grow and develop. It's like I get to see every milestone of his because I'm with him every single day. And to the point where I'm like, I can tell the sounds you're making, these babbling sounds you're making are changing.
Yeah.
Or you used to make this kind of cooing sound that you're not making anymore. Or
Hmm.
like, kids get stuck, babies get stuck in this like, I'm going to babble in this. Yes, sir. I'm going to babble with these consonants and then the consonants will change.
Yeah.
Or like, just like all of a sudden one day he'll start making a new face that we haven't seen before. And all of those moments are super cool to see. And you only see those when you're the parent and you're with them all of the time. So
100%.
yeah, it's been just like an incredibly rewarding and fun year for me on a personal level because I've gotten to spend that time with him. And for me, the lockdown and like the shutting down of the world due to COVID has been a blessing in disguise because I have gotten to spend so much more time with him, especially since I am technically back at work now and I can work from home and I can, I don't have to commute anywhere. I don't have to leave the house. I don't have to take him to daycare. I don't have to be away from him for, 9 or 10 hours a day. Instead, I can just be here with him. He's here in the house with me. I can pop out, have lunch with him, breastfeed him whenever I need to. And that's been super, super convenient for me during this first year. So I feel very fortunate.
Yeah. The tragedy of COVID aside, like I think many parents, including myself, would mirror that sentiment. Like it's been a wonderful year. Again, like not saying what's going on isn't crazy, but on a personal level inside of our home, it's been a huge blessing because when would the entire country, the entire world give remote work a shot? other
Yeah.
than this.
Yeah. It's
And
kind of accelerated these changes that I think were due in like the working world in terms of remote work and that sort of thing.
for sure. So we are with y'all with our newborn now, and she's
Hmm.
3 months old. But
Huh.
I never had a chance to with our first. So I have two, and then my partner has one before we were together. So now we have four. But I never had a chance with my other two to like really see those day to day changes on the level that I can with Josie now, and
Hmm.
it is just so completely night and day different. Like
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. You're
Whereas,
just so much more present now.
yes, 100%. And there's plenty of frustrations that come along with that, like trying to work and be a dad
Yeah.
at home.
Yep. Yep.
But it's been an amazingly rewarding year to be able to see the changes, to be able to just appreciate all of it. Many of those things I hope kind of carry forward. Like there is no reason we all need to be in the office every single day. I would imagine there'd be a whole lot of world problems that would be solved by saying, let's just come to work 2 or 3 times a week. Like,
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of companies are changing their policies as a result of COVID. I think some companies are still navigating that and trying to figure out how it will look. Some companies have already announced completely remote office, like we're shutting down our offices and all of our employees are just going to be remote permanently. Others are kind of still toying with this idea of like part-time remote, part-time in office.
yeah,
And then, others are still going to wait and see how it shakes out before they decide. But, obviously they save a lot of money if they don't have to keep these offices running as well, especially like offices that have, food services as well, where it's just like you're employing so many people in addition
for
to
sure.
just maintaining the office spaces. So, um, yeah, it's going to change a lot in time. I know, and I think honestly, I mean, I actually don't know how you guys have been navigating it because you have the older children as well. Um, but for me, it's been super easy because I don't have older kids and I don't have to homeschool and I don't have to worry about like socialization too much yet. Like he's only now just kind of getting to the phase where I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I would really like him to see and interact with other kids, but as a newborn, it doesn't really matter if there's other babies around them. But how
Yeah.
is it with your older children who, I'm not sure how old they are, but like school aged, homeschooling, are you having to navigate that at all?
Yeah. So we've had three in homeschooling at a time, plus the newborn. So that's
Yeah.
been, I mean, it's just, and Yen, Yen
Hmm.
is just crazy. Like the strength and work in that girl, I don't understand. I feel like,
Hmm.
there needs to be certain words in the English vocabulary that change. The term of like the men calling other men pussies when they're not strong enough, that needs to shift to like dicks. Like, because honestly,
Hmm.
like her
Yeah.
strength and the general strength of women is so significantly beyond where we're at.
Hmm.
I will when I'm under the weather, when I'm sick, and it's not even like I don't even think of my guy friends I'm the worst at this. I would put Justin in a category that's even worse than me. But like I'm a baby.
Hmm.
She's on a day-to-day basis like either nursing a cold, and no, she doesn't have the Rona.
Hmm.
But I know that like some of our audience is like, is she sick? No, but that is a matter of time. But she'll be lack of sleep, sick, wake up every day, 5 a.m., pump, breastfeed, get the kids off to school, like do it all. And she's working freelance from home about 20 to 30 hours billable a
Oh my
week.
God.
And she's been doing it for the like this entire year. And I'm sitting here going like,
Amazing. She's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I
I
think I'm fully in support of what it is that you're saying. And I absolutely 100% agree that there is not enough recognition in the world for all of the things that mothers do. And I didn't understand it until I was a mother, until I became a mother, right? It's like,
yeah,
obviously, it's like, sure, I appreciate my mom and all that. But like, until you're in that position and you realize just how exhausted you are and how you have to still just keep going no matter what. You don't understand, right?
It's
So,
wild.
yeah.
It's, and I don't think guys can appreciate it either until they see their significant other doing it. And you're
Yeah. I
like,
mean, I still have to remind my significant other every now and then of all of the things that I do. So, but yeah, I mean, they definitely don't see it until it's happening in their household. And even then it's like, I was just having a conversation, about it. I was basically talking very loudly at my husband about this the other day,
talking
about this
very
idea.
loudly. I like
Yeah.
this.
I was talking loudly at my husband the other day about how much I do that he doesn't realize I do, right?
Yeah.
The invisible burden. I think there's articles, I'm sure I know there are articles that I've read about it, like the invisible burden that mothers have to bear that is just, goes unseen by many other members of the households, right? Even that, I know it just went around last week, the SNL, did you see it? The SNL skit about the mother
No.
who got the robe.
No.
Yeah, so it was an SNL skit that was like went viral on Instagram for a few days, and it was basically, Christmas morning, everybody, like the whole family, like mother, father, two kids, they're all opening up their gifts, and it's like one after the other, they're showing the cool new thing that they got, cool new thing, and the mom's like, I got a robe, and then all of these new other gifts, and the mom's like, I got a robe, and then like cool new gift, and then like I'm gonna go make breakfast for everyone, So it's just like,
Yes.
and then like wow, look at all this stuff Santa left in my stocking, and then the mom's like, mine is empty yet again, another year for Santa didn't put anything in my stocking.
It's
So
only funny because it's so accurate.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, it was definitely like a message to be like, their message at the end was like, like, hey guys, moms like Christmas too, or moms deserve gifts too. So I thought that was really nice,
Yeah, I
but
think
very true.
I'm on the, if there was a spectrum of, the man's man to the kind of feminine kind of guy, I would definitely be very close to the feminine kind of guy over on the other side. And I think that helps me in a lot of ways, but at the same time, most of my guy friends are on the spectrum of the man's man, and they're very unaware. Like, it's not like they don't. Part of this, I think, is because I grew up as an only child. Part of it is also, like, I was in a home with, I don't want to say my dad was abusive. He was an immigrant father that, like, came by a different set of standards. Like,
Yeah.
you don't clean up, you don't do this, then you're gonna get beat with my belt. Like those were the basics. And on a bad day, it might just happen anyway. So I love my dad. He was amazing, but he was a single father raising me in a country that he had just moved to while earning, like, there's just so much on his plate. So he did his best. He did an amazing job. But what I did learn was, like, how do I had to learn how to interpret his emotions without him saying anything. So every day when he would come home, I would look at his face. I would judge his face and see, like, do I need to keep my distance? Is this going to be a good day? So it made me hypersensitive in many, many ways, which has its downsides, being
Uh-huh.
hypersensitive. But one of the upsides of that is that I can see what's going on around me. And I also very much, like, a big part of who I am is human psychology. And that's what's given me such a passion in psychology. But yeah, I can very clearly see what Yen is doing. And I can also say, and I can clearly see what other women, like Justin's wife, Yvette, I don't think you, Yvette, Yen, y'all are the same. And I can unequivocally say, I would be unable to do what you do. Like, it's not even like, it's not a point of pride. It's not a point of anything. It's just, there's a different level of responsibility and work ethic, which I hope the world wakes up to one day to recognize and see. But
Yeah,
in the meantime,
absolutely.
I'll just keep talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, and like the more people talk about it, the better it is for everyone because you're teaching through the things that you're saying to people. You're teaching people what to look for, what to recognize, and that's obviously very much appreciated. So
It,
keep doing
it's
it.
it's very much an odd thing, and I don't consider myself a social justice warrior. I like to I'm not a keyboard warrior. I like to talk and like
Hmm.
actually show action behind things.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting to see how the English language has taken on so many nuances that either imply or directly state that women are the weaker sex. It is
Hmm.
crazy to me. Especially
Yeah.
like it almost seems like in the same way like religion is used to guide and direct behavior, it almost seems like it was a form of oppression and a guide to dictate behavior and keep people in check. I don't know. Very odd.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the language has evolved over time, and the terms that came about years and years ago, generations ago, have stuck with the language as it's moved forward in time, even though society and people's thoughts have changed. It's like, um, I was trying to think. I mean, it's the same with like racial terms, like derogatory racial terms as well. It's like these racial terms came about years and years ago. Um, and we're still like, obviously we're trying to wake up to the fact that these exist, and we need to fix our language and change the way that we're using, or like not use these terms anymore. But like, you don't realize how many things are just kind of naturally in our vocabularies, because that's how it's been for so long. You use them without thinking about it because that's just always been the word that you use for whatever. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that
And
it seems like, it seems like this year with like all of the like social justice movements of 2020 and whatnot, and all of the sort of like the transition that I've seen with social media turning into more of an educational platform as well. It's been really great for me to see how, now instead of just it being like the highlight reels of our lives, we get to actually learn and share things, and things that go viral are actually informative and help make people better. So a lot of that, like, let's change the language that we utilize for talking about other people. A lot of that's been going around as well. So I hope to see more of that, or to hope to continue to see that over time.
I agree. It feels like it's all moving in positive directions. Although I would be lying if I said I was not extremely annoyed by the way that it's happening. But at the same time, at least it's happening.
I mean, it's like, I don't know if most people would choose for these things to be happening in this format, but it's really cool to me that to see how people utilizing this format have evolved to um, make it something positive and life changing, as opposed to just being, social media for fun and sharing photos and
I
family
agree.
stuff. So,
I agree.
like,
The part that I
yeah,
probably have the hardest time with is when people, you know, basically turn ideas and movements into platforms to serve their own purposes. And I
yeah.
know a lot of people that do that. They're not genuinely interested
Mm.
in women's rights. They're jumping on a bandwagon to get support and to get likes and to promote what they do themselves.
Right. Or to like start a business and bring money in. There's been
Yeah,
people, I mean, I think that that Sean King guy, have you heard about him
I
on
didn't see that
Instagram?
one. No.
I mean, I don't know too many details about it, but Sean King posts all of this stuff about Black Lives Matter and like, defund the police and all of these things that you look at and you're like, that's awesome. I'm fully in support of that. Like, I want
Yeah,
there to be justice brought to these people who've died at the hands of the police and all of these things. And then, even, I would share these things on my story and like see them reshared. And then suddenly it was like, don't trust Sean King. He's a fraud. And then now I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Right. Cause it seems like a positive thing that he's doing, spreading this message and like raising money is where the fraudulent stuff came in. It was like he was raising money to give to the families of these victims of police violence, or whatever, that were, the money in theory was going to good causes, or for good, being used in good ways. But I think he maybe just didn't utilize the money in the way that he said he was, and he has a huge platform on Instagram, so a lot of people were donating money, and maybe hopefully it's sorted itself out. I mean, or will sort itself out. I'm not really sure, but he's definitely on people's radar as, not being the most legit person to give your money to.
and
So,
there's a lot of those. It's not just that
Yeah.
it's like across the board. I know so many who I know so many that like I went through a lot of racism, and not to say that I think what I went through pales in comparison to the average black person. But like
Oh
growing
yeah.
up in
Same.
Utah as a brown guy during the Gulf War, as an
Ah,
Iranian, it
yeah. Yeah.
was
Yeah.
day to day for 4 or 5 years. It was, I'm going to get beat up. I'm going to get, jumped. I'm going to get something. And the good days were when people just, called me the casual racist slur.
Hmm.
But that was very normal to me. And I only had to deal with it for a short period of time, as opposed to women who have had to deal with this for hundreds of years, deal with just general discrimination for hundreds of years, as opposed to black people who deal with that plus discrimination plus every single thing, for the same thing for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And then what I would think would be the most annoying thing for everybody, because it is for me, is watching the same people that did those things to you then turn around and start jumping on the bandwagon and promoting
Yeah.
something simply because they don't want to be the next target, or because they want to platform, they want
Hmm.
to promote themselves on the guise of this thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to, do you remember the black squares on Instagram that were
Yeah.
getting posted, like
Yeah.
Blackout Tuesday?
Yeah.
Um, do you remember all of the kind of backlash that came about because of those?
I remember.
Or did
Yes.
you see? Yeah,
It's
I
felt
mean,
like there's been backlash across the board, but
yeah,
I
I mean,
posted a
it's,
black square too. At least I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure I did.
yeah, I mean, I posted a black square and then I was like, should I delete the black square? I mean, I was definitely in that early group of like, hashtagging it Black Lives Matter, and then people would comment and say, actually, you shouldn't use this hashtag. It pollutes the hashtag
Yeah. Yeah. I
because
remember that.
people are trying to utilize it to spread messages. I'm like, okay, I totally get that. Fully respect that. Let me remove the hashtag.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do you tell millions and millions of people that who are posting these black squares who, are not going to have somebody like, at least I have an audience that's looking at it and can educate me,
Yeah.
right? But like, some random person who doesn't really have that many followers, they're posting black squares with the hashtag Black Lives Matter and polluting that hashtag, and they're not getting that message. So, in any case, the problem that I had with that whole situation was that, kind of in line with what you were saying, it's like, as I can completely see that, if there are people who feel like they've been victimized by this group, right? So it's like, you know, I'm sure, there were many white people posting black squares, professing their sort of support and allyship of the Black Lives Matter movement. But then at the same time, like you said, it's like, hey, actually, some of these people posting these black squares have maybe been the people who have done the victimization
Yeah.
in the past, who'd maybe, I mean, best case scenario, they don't realize it. Worst case scenario, much worse than that, right?
For sure.
But the complaint about that whole thing was like performative social justice, right? Like, we're posting a black square because we want there to be this, like, we want it to look like we're fully in support of this movement, but like posting a black square isn't going to change the world. It's not going to change people, and it's not going to make the world better. You have to do other things in
Yes.
addition to make change, not just post this black square. So
That's what is, people think that this keyboard activism is genuinely beneficial. And I'm sitting here going that, you know, it's really closer to, if you truly believe it and there's a message behind it, it's genuine, it comes through. If
mm-hmm,
this is the first time you're posting something about this, it's virtue signaling. I mean,
mm-hmm,
this is really what it is, more than it is any form of activism whatsoever. And then I'm sitting here going like, if you really want to help, go and create jobs for people. Go and serve soup in a soup kitchen. Go and, do something with your time beyond just simply kind of getting behind something. Now, the part about it, seeing this kind of stuff online, that kind of hypocrisy is more annoying. It's a nuisance, and I can genuinely say the overall good is still there, and the movement is still helping to push things forward. The part where I think it gets despicable is when politicians build their entire campaign around one of these ideas, one of these platforms that is visibly something that they were not for
Yeah.
years prior. And then it just becomes like, man, this is beyond hypocrisy. This is like you're a complete fraud. You're a charlatan who is putting on this guise. And that's the place where like, and it's so incredibly obvious. It's like as if it's almost like they treat us like we're dumb. You know what I mean? And those kind of things frustrate me more than anything else. But
yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, politicians are this whole other story, this whole other beast that I'm not sure if I'm ready to tackle. But
who wants to be a politician? Like, first of all, who wants to do this job?
Like, don't trust anybody who wants to be a politician, first of all. But yeah, I mean, it's like they forget that everything that they've ever said and done in their careers is recorded in some way, shape, or form, and then can be shared back. But I mean, that being said, I also recognize that people can change their minds and their feelings about certain things
for sure
over time as well, right? So it's like new information, or you tried something and you realize it didn't work, that sort of thing. So yeah,
for sure, leaving room for. Well, tell me about this. You said you are Taiwanese. I have to ask, 你会讲台湾话吗? Or 你会讲国语吗?
我会, but not very well. I mean, I'm okay. So I'm okay. I want to ask you about your Chinese skills, but first of all, yeah, I was born in Taiwan.
Okay.
I speak Mandarin. I don't really speak Taiwanese.
Okay.
I speak Mandarin, but only conversationally and not all that well. And it's been years, honestly, since I've last really spoken it. So, yeah, my mom remarried. Like I moved to the States when I was 10 months old. And my mom remarried to a white guy. We didn't speak Chinese in the household growing up. I was definitely one of those kids who my mom would speak Chinese to me, but I would answer her in English.
Yeah.
And I grew up on the Navajo reservation. So there were no other Chinese kids. There were no Chinese schools. There were no, there was no like cultural anything that I could access from there. So I am a very, very non-Asian person.
No,
I'm a banana. I'm a banana.
I'm a coconut. I fully respect that because that was almost my experience identically, except my Navajo reservation was Utah, which in and of itself is its own reservation.
Yeah.
Utah's its own bubble. But not to make any comparisons there that would get me canceled here.
Where did you grow up in Utah?
I grew up in Salt Lake City. And so I had I should speak Farsi, but I had no Iranian people around me. So it was like just being surrounded by Caucasian people. My dad would speak Farsi to me to a point, like your mother. And then once, like by the time I was like 7, I was only speaking to dad in English. And he was like, you know what? I'm not going to force this anymore. So I can't even like if I asked you a question, I'm going to test you. Okay, let's see here. 你住在三藩市吗?
我现在不住在旧金山。
旧金山 OK。那你最喜欢的中国餐是什么菜吗？最喜欢中国菜？
我最喜欢吃面。
Okay, so your Chinese is 1,000 times better than my Farsi.
Well, I mean, your Chinese sounds way better than my Chinese. So yeah. So what were you born in Utah as well, or did you come over when you were really young?
So I was born in Tehran. Okay. And then I was about 2 when we got to California, and then like 5 when we got to Utah.
Okay. Yeah, very similar paths. I mean, I was 10 months old when we got to California.
Yeah.
Moved to Wyoming when I was 1, and then to Arizona to the reservation when I was 3. So, yeah, I mean, I did all of my schooling on the Navajo reservation, from preschool to when I graduated from high school. My parents were there till I graduated from college, and now they're in North Carolina. So it's like we've never lived in a hub with other Asian people before. So,
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's been nice for me coming to San Francisco. I don't live in the city like I just said in Chinese. I don't live in the city anymore. I now live in the suburbs, but I actually don't know how to say suburbs in Chinese.
I have to say that I find you to be one of the most calm and probably one of the most empathetic people that I know. And I've known this about you for a while, but I've been very curious why.
Mm.
And now I feel like I know. Like, you are Taiwanese. You were brought over here. Your parents are immigrants. You grew up on a Navajo reservation, several different places. You are a special needs educator, as well as just an educator. Like, I feel like you've seen so much, and it makes sense to me why you are this very calm and patient and empathetic communicator.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I think that I think I've definitely reached that stage in my life where I feel like, yeah, I've seen things and I've done things and I've experienced things that many people would only sort of dream to in their lives. Like, never in my life growing up as a kid on the reservation did I expect to get paid to travel the world and take photos and um, just to be able to see all these places outside of my own home and space where I'm living and growing up. So I feel super fortunate to have experienced all of these things. I think there's a lot of it that has come from, obviously there's, what's naturally in me in terms of like my personality and the way that I act and whatnot. But there's definitely, you know, your life and your perception of life and people is changed when you are like like both of us, the only one or one of very few of us in a certain place, right? So it wasn't always easy for me as one of the very, very few Asian people growing up on the Navajo reservation. A lot of those experiences, there were a lot of times growing up when I didn't appreciate it. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be there. But I think that certainly shifted and changed my outlook on life and, um, you know, shaped me into who I am, of
Yeah.
course.
How do you feel like that shaped you? Like, what are some of the experiences that you kind of had living there?
Um, I think that, well, it's interesting because on the reservation, if you're not Native American, you're a minority.
Yeah.
So I was able to witness, not even just my own perspective of being Asian on the reservation, because at least honestly, as an Asian person, I still had dark hair. And honestly, like my skin was pretty dark growing up in Arizona.
Hmm.
So I was able to blend in a little bit better, like much
Yeah.
more easily than like the blonde kids, right?
Yeah.
There were white people, not that many, but there were white people on the reservation. And, like I said, my mom remarried to a white guy. So he was a teacher at the high school on the reservation. And, you just hear all these stories and see it happening firsthand as well. Like, there was racism and discrimination that I experienced growing up on the reservation. But then there was also racism and discrimination that my father experienced as a white man teaching on the reservation. But then you also see that, hey, the people who are sort of the dominant group on the reservation, as soon as they leave the reservation, they're experiencing all this racism and
Yeah.
discrimination. So it's this cycle where nobody's ever, like, it's rare for there to not be a victim in this situation, like in the little bubble that I was in, right? Because
Yeah.
obviously, like, as a white man, anywhere else in the world, practically my dad would be much better off, not experiencing all of these negative things. But when you bring them, like, white people in and have them as the minorities in this kind of situation, it just kind of, I don't know, is to me like a good learning experience, I guess. Like it was good for me to recognize the fact that, you know, like victims can also be perpetrators, but also there's like a reason for the way that people, it's like the way people treat other people is not necessarily because they themselves are bad people. It's because of the like the situation, the society that they grew up in, and like the circumstances
Yeah.
under which we are all in, right? So I think just kind of recognizing those nuances, even though I'm right now talking about it, maybe I'm not able to enunciate it very well, but I think just I had a very different experience when it came to race and race relations than most other people I knew. So by the time I graduated from high school and I went to college in LA, I had experienced like such a different sort of like
Childhood.
childhood and like
Yeah.
everything was just I don't know, I just had this like such a different perspective on everything, having grown up in a place where, you know, I was a minority, white people were a minority, there was a lot of disadvantage around me, and you know, just feeling like I had to like work extra hard to kind of make my way out of that situation as well. I don't know,
It's
it's hard. I don't know if I still, even after all these years, can really fully talk about it, or
it
like
well
not, I mean
it's
like, or explain what I'm trying to say.
no, I know what you're saying, and like it's a very interesting thing because, to be honest, the in my humble opinion, which, you know, this podcast is a safe place for opinions. So whatever your opinions
Mm-hmm.
are, you know, we can agree to disagree, and we can have civil conversations, and we can all still be friends. Like, this is a place to explore ideas and to be wrong, and to be okay being wrong. But I will say this: I believe that the cure to racism is figuring out some way to let everybody feel it. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
if
I
everybody
would agree.
knew what it actually felt like, then people would be much more cognizant of the small and imperceivable ways that we act in a way that's discriminatory that we might not even know. On top of that, there's this language barrier that prevents us from seeing and hearing racism in other languages. And I'm sitting here going, I speak Cantonese and Mandarin, and I'll tell you some of the most horrific things that I've ever heard about me came while I was in China.
Mm-hmm.
Things that people would say in my face, assuming that I didn't speak the language.
Yeah.
And it's on a like a regular daily basis. Now, granted, I was an adult at that point. It's like I don't really care. I would usually make light of the situation, but the terms that would be used in Chinese, the specific terms for like in Cantonese, you know, there's a generic term called bak guai, which is basically the white devil, right? So like this was the term that was used for anybody that is foreign, or guailo, guilao. I don't know if guilao is not really that often used in
I
Mandarin, is
feel
it?
like I've heard the term, but I am not super familiar.
Yeah, guailo is a like a ghost dude. So like,
Mm-hmm.
or lao wai. Lao wai is like a dude, a foreigner. So like
Yeah.
these were like common words that
Yeah, Lao
even,
Wai I'm familiar with, and that
you
was
know, lao
always
wai.
just like, yeah, that always just seemed like not meant to be derogatory, but I don't know, my in my limited understanding of the language, I guess maybe it is. I'm not sure.
Well, it's like the term is foreigner, right? So, but
Mhm.
the contextually, if we were to have a conversation and a friend was like, you know, Justin's like, I go, oh, this is Pei, and she's a foreigner. That would be the equivalent of the way that the conversation would go. Now, if anybody here
Mhm.
said that, like they would be up in arms. Like, how dare you call me a foreigner? But
Mhm.
that is part of the actual language. Same thing with Guilao, same thing with Bakwai, same thing with all these terms, some far more derogatory, but ones that are used to actually Like if I'm in conversation with you and I'm sitting here going, if the world understood kind of this overall issue, then it would be much easier to empathize with and to actually address.
Mhm.
But we're so focused on just the way that we talk to each other here that like
Mhm.
we don't realize that this discriminatory behavior is built into every single language that people learn and grow up
Mhm.
with from around the world. So like
Yeah.
we can talk about it all we want here, but it's really not going to do too much. But granted, where we're at is so much further than the countries that where this isn't even a conversation. Like I've never heard somebody in, and this isn't, I have an affinity obviously for the Chinese culture. I speak the languages and I've lived in that culture for such a long time, but I have yet never heard somebody like the word 种族歧视, 种族歧视. Okay, that term I learned probably about 20 years ago, racism.
Mm. I actually don't
It
know. I don't even know what the term is. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's kind of my point is I've lived in the culture for 20 years. I've never heard one person say the term racism like in a
Huh. Yeah.
conversation. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I learned this dictionary phrase and yet nobody's ever used it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the interesting thing about us, especially in 2020, with all of this sort of, in our face, we have to deal with it in some way. Racism, like we can't avoid it living in the United States in 2020. We
Yeah.
have to think about it. We have to talk about it. We have to ideally make changes and try to make things better. But we in the United States, we're like one of the biggest melting pots of the world, right? Where we constantly are surrounded by people from all different countries. But, when you go, I mean, we're like one of the most heterogeneous cultures in the world, right? Or societies in the world. So like when you go to China, right, it's like one of the most homogeneous
Hmm.
cultures in the world, right? There's not a mixing the way to, and nowhere near the degree that we see it here. So it's almost like it's not something that people in other countries are forced to address and deal with because it's such a like the exposure within the society isn't there, right? So
Yeah.
there's no need to deal with it and address it when there aren't very many comparatively foreigners living in your country or your
No,
society.
it's true. It is very true. I'm trying to think like what other places maybe we just don't get the news from because there are like other places that are significant melting pots. I mean, Germany and the UK and like these places are also melting pots. I don't know if to the extent of the United States, even
Mm-hmm.
Canada in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like it's such a pervasive conversation here, and it's one that like I agree with you. It needs to be had, and people need to not be afraid of talking about it too. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like if I have the conversation with people, especially amongst my Caucasian friends, it's almost like they think they're going to be canceled if they say something wrong. Like if I say anything the wrong way,
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
going to
cancel culture
offend.
is like out of hand
That's got to
here
go.
in the States.
Yeah.
It's just like people, like I said earlier, can make mistakes and then change. They either don't realize they made a mistake. It's like a totally innocent thing, I think, in many instances, and these people still get canceled. And like you're ruining lives over like an Instagram post that
It's
was just done without even,
wild.
so yeah, yeah.
There was and this isn't to take this conversation down a depressing path, but there was this interaction yesterday, I think, in Orange County, with this white guy that he was like definitely off his rails for saying what he said, and he used several racial slurs addressing an Asian person who was recording this thing. And the guy's an idiot, the guy's a moron, the guy's a bigot. Say what you want, but the speed at which the internet destroyed his entire livelihood was mind blowing. Like it was as soon as this thing happened and it went online, Nobody tried to even understand the situation or the pretext and context leading up to the situation. Nothing. Not to say what the guy said was anything condonable. It was horrific. But the video only showed, of course, the worst part of this interaction,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously a super heated moment. And within, I'm telling you, Pei, it was an hour. His business had been tanked. So all of his Yelp reviews just were filled with
Right.
memes and reviews saying like, this guy's a racist, he's a bigot, he's a piece of crap, he's all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They blasted his, like, just to look at the way that the internet just, it's frankly appalling. It's also terrifying in many ways that, like, as humans, we have so little patience with one another. Like, if you, not excusing what he said, but to think that, when you're incredibly upset, we all say a lot of things that we don't really mean. And especially if you
Yeah.
want to hurt somebody, you attack
Yeah.
them in a way that, like, however you can, if all you're seeing is red. Now, when we come to our senses, we're usually ashamed of that behavior, and most of us work to, like, kind of figure ourselves out so we don't do those kind of things repeatedly and whatnot. But to be universally judged, tried, and hung based on 15 seconds of your worst moment in life, I can't think of anything worse.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. That also being said, I believe that oftentimes when you're capturing that worst of the worst 15 seconds, those people, like the many of those people, that is not the for many of those people, that is not the only time that they've uttered those words and said those things.
For sure.
So that's where it becomes tricky, because I also am of the mindset that, like, I mean, I probably fall more on the school of, like, yeah, you should totally be punished for what you just did or said or whatever. But um, yeah, it's hard to know when you're dealing with a situation where it's like the one time someone got really mad and slipped and said something they shouldn't have said, or when you're actually, like, people's true opinions that have been repeated over time are just being documented, right? So it's just
I
hard to
agree.
know. But I agree that, like, you know we shouldn't completely destroy somebody's life for, you know 15 seconds. I mean, I have a hard time, I've debated this a couple times, the whole, like, Amy Cooper in the park, New York Central Park, with her dog calling the police on the guy. Oh, there's a black
That
man
stuff's
trying
pretty
to attack
wild.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, her dog was taken away from her.
Yeah.
Obviously she lost her job and her dog was taken away and all of these things. But then, yeah, it's like,
There's,
I could argue both sides.
I know what you're saying, and I would agree with you that, like, there, some level of social repercussion is merited, and but at the same time, like, does it merit your life being ruined and your dog being taken away? Like everything. I guess I grew up around so much of this, and I will say this: growing up around, just like what you said about being on the reservation, growing up around it, when I was 17 in high school, and I had the opportunity to be racist to somebody else who was maybe Vietnamese or who was maybe something else, I took it. I will be
Mhm.
completely honest and say I was just as much a part of the problem, because now granted, like, I was also friends with most of these people. So, like, it was like more like two buddies, making fun of each other. But, like, I would say racist jokes. I would say all that kind of, because people said that to me all day long. So it was like, oh, it's
Yeah.
my chance to say this to somebody else. Now, if somebody had recorded one of those snippets, if somebody had recorded that, if this were 20 years later and I was going through high school, it would be so easy to snap up one of those 15 seconds and make an entire judgment call based on that one moment. But that's not who I am. That wasn't who I was back then. And so I guess I have a little bit of sympathy for these moments where, like, someone can be caught in a, granted, like you said, there's usually some sort of, in some cases,
Pattern.
there's a pattern and there's some sort of, like, justice that is warranted.
Yeah.
But the side of where we're at right now, I think we're on the opposite side of the extreme where it's like
Yeah.
we're reacting, you know, a lesson's, it's not as if a lesson is being taught, it's as if we've thrown them in prison.
Yeah. Or like into a fire directly,
Yes.
right? I mean, because it is like, yeah, are we capturing 15 seconds of a person having a bad day and slipping and making a mistake? Or are we capturing 15 seconds of some person's actual personality and thought process and, you know, the way that they view the world and always act, right? And there's no way of knowing from that 15-second video. So yeah, it's tough. So you want to err on the side of like, you know, not letting people get away with it, but also you don't want to ruin people's lives entirely as a result either, right? Because it's like somebody could have captured that 15 seconds of you in high school.
Yeah.
And then it's like the Bill Clinton, I didn't inhale kind of thing. It's like, that's going to surface, you know, if you ever tried to run for office, that would surface as like a, you know, but look, he's racist at his heart. Even back when he was in high school, he was saying these racist things, and now he's just an adult and knows to hide it. But he still feels that way, I'm sure, right? And that would ruin your political career.
That's, I don't have a solution for any of this other than just to talk about it. But that is one of the inherent problems, is that I guess like I want to, you know, that part of this podcast is having a safe place to say like, I'm going to make mistakes. And I think part of being an intellectual is being willing to change your mind. I think learning new things, and when you come up with new ideas and new things, that you're willing to give up old thoughts. And I think that anybody who believes that is an intellectual person. But the way that society is built, specifically our leadership, politicians, they are supposed to put on an air of perfection. I'm sorry, but there is no such thing. There is nobody that went through all of it that doesn't have skeletons in the closet. So why can't, you know, this next generation of leadership be more so about being transparent and saying, look, I've done some shitty things, but that's not who I am. We've all done those things. Like, why can't, if that's what being a politician were, then you would see a lot of, you know, good people going and being a politician. People that, but we both know, you and I know, that that's not what it is. If I did want to run to be president, people would find every possible way to smear me. And so you have to have people that are willing to pretend to be perfect when in reality, they're far from it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like a little glimmer of hope exists now, you know, not just due to the changing administration, but also due to the fact that there are like a lot younger politicians coming into play, a lot more diversity and representation in who's in these offices. Where I do feel like this facade of like, you must always be perfect and never have made mistakes is shifting. Like we don't need to abide by that anymore. We can totally, like, I think even with Biden, like, you know, he gets called out for votes that he made on certain policies, you know, 20, 30 years ago. But like I was saying, it's like, people can change their minds when new information comes about. And like you said, that it's a sign of maturity and growth in a person. We want that, right? We don't want somebody to always vote the same way in office because that's how they've always historically voted, even though new information has come to light that has proven that that's not the right way to vote, right? I would rather somebody just own up to it and say, actually, you're right. I don't think that was a good decision. And I really wish I hadn't voted in that way. And I feel like there were situations that Biden was called out for where he did exactly that. So I'm
That
like,
will be
well,
an incredible day in politics when that becomes the norm. When a
yeah.
politician can get called out and say, you know what, I made the wrong decision based on the information that I had, and today I would make a different one. And that was the end of the conversation. It wasn't justification. It wasn't anything else. It was just, let's all take ownership of all of our garbage type thing. But, you know, I don't mean to, you know, I don't want to cast a negative light over any of this stuff. And I obviously love this conversation with you, but it's all trending towards this fantastic direction. And one of like the signs of that for me, I'll be honest, I don't think I actually told you this, but was our Adobe community call, the Lightroom
Mm,
community call that you set up. So
yeah.
I don't think we've even talked about
We
this,
haven't
but
we haven't talked about photos at all, or really.
yes, Pei is you are the Lightroom community manager. Yes, is that what that is?
Um, yeah, I sit on the product marketing team, but I'm not a marketer. I don't have a marketing background. It's just the best place for me as somebody that they brought on to engage the community. So, my formal title is product marketing manager, but that's definitely not what I do. Yeah, for all intents and purposes, community manager, community engagement liaison, community lead. I run the Lightroom Ambassador program. So yeah, I was brought on to create a bridge between Lightroom and the community, the photography community, because traditionally there hasn't really been somebody in place who is really engaging and talking to the community, and there to sort of bring people together over photography and conversations about it, and really just trying to elevate and support photographers in any way that the Lightroom team can.
Well, so I have plenty of thoughts and questions on this side, but
Mhm.
the moment that I was referring to was you put together this kind of creative Zoom call with,
Yeah, it was our Lightroom virtual social. Yeah,
that's what it
because we
was.
can't do them in person in 2020. Yeah.
And I was sitting there and I went into this grid view on Zoom where you can see like everybody
Mhm.
participating. And I remember just looking and I took a screenshot of it. But I was looking at it and I was going, there is not a majority or a minority. Everyone here is unique and different. It was
Mhm.
every race, every sex, every background, every possible kind of experience in one place.
Yeah.
And I was like, this didn't exist 10 years ago. It most
Yep.
certainly didn't exist 20 years ago. And I was like,
Yep.
this is pretty incredible. And I remember screenshotting. I was like, I got to tell Pei about this later.
Yeah.
But it was crazy, right? Did
Yeah.
you notice that too?
Yeah.
Or
Yes, and also it's intentional.
it was okay.
Mhm. I mean, it's not like I'm only admitting, one of this person and or one of this type of person and one of that type of person. It's like multiple levels of intentionality have been laid out in advance of something like that, right? Because so, for instance, the people that I invited into these virtual socials, because right now the virtual socials are still for this the community of Lightroom users that we're already engaging with in some way. So there are people who are creating tutorials for us, or who work with us on photography campaigns, or who are, Lightroom ambassadors or photography creative residents or whatever. But like, and yes, if people are curious, we do plan on doing like larger community things in the future. But this is, I'm still fairly new at Adobe. I'm kind of getting my footing still, trying to figure out what the best way is to engage with everybody. But um, the multiple layers of intentionality that I'm talking about are across the board. At Adobe, we try to be really thoughtful about the people that we engage with, right? We want there to be diversity in terms of, representation from like different backgrounds, different photography styles, different geographical locations. And so I'm already blessed with this like incredibly diverse group of people to invite into these Lightroom virtual socials that I was doing, or that I am doing. And the one that you participated in was one of 3 pilot socials that I'm doing. So for those, I just targeted specific people within this larger Lightroom community that I'm pulling from. So, I want there to be, and I want for Adobe to continue to make a concerted effort to represent people from all different backgrounds. So um, the cool thing is that we can do that because there are so many people from all these different backgrounds who are engaged, in photography and making tutorials and being active in the photography space. So yeah, I think it's rad. I think absolutely that it's like something that never would have happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And it's nicer. nice for me that I've been brought in as a photographer with no tech background, no marketing background to work on the Lightroom community and be the person kind of engaging with photographers. So, they took a chance bringing me on board because I think they really are a company that's trying to make a difference and make change and create a space for all different types of creators.
I don't think they could have found Anthony. Can you actually pull up Pei's work for a second? I don't think they could have found anyone better for that position, and I mean like globally. Part of one of the reasons why that social I feel like was so successful and so engaging and so interesting and compelling. It really goes back to what we talked about earlier about kind of your ability to empathize. And I can see it through your portraits. And maybe it's because I like human psychology, or maybe it's just that evident. I would think based on the number of people that follow you, it's very clear that you have a broad range of experiences and your portraits are incredibly empathetic to the human experience. Now, when we took that into the Lightroom social, I was like, this is nutso, because what was happening, and I kept thinking, if this were in person, if we were all sitting in the same room together, what you have in this group of people that Pei has put together is you have every potential gender experience that's included. You have every potential photographic background that's included, from travel photography to wedding photography to journalism to commercial work, everything. Every background in terms of racial identity and ethnic experiences was included in that group. And I thought, man, to put an idea out on the table and to have a discussion and debate, this would be the group that would come up with the best solutions. So anyway, I think a huge part of that is you, like that is you and putting together this group of people. But it was incredible to see. I can't wait for more. I hope there are many more.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you noticing that and mentioning it, because I think that not everyone would notice or realize that that's what was going on and kind of the thought that was put into it. But yes, I am planning for more coming up, and maybe I will tap you to help me lead one of them. Actually, I think you'd be perfect for it. So.
I think it's an amazing experience. It was awesome. And I was like, in that group of creators, I know last time you asked me to kind of give a little presentation, but as I was in there, I was like, I wish I could just listen. Like, I just want to hear everybody's experiences.
Yeah. And I would love that as well, because I think everybody has something really incredible to share. But it was I'm trying to find a balance, like I mentioned, because these are the pilot sessions. I'm trying to find a format that works, that feels good to people. And you were, I think, in the first session, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So you were the first session. I apologize if you can hear my dogs barking.
Oh, you're
Can you
good.
hear them?
Yes, I love dogs.
Yeah. There must be like a package or something coming. But in any case, the first session that we did, the one that you attended, basically I had asked you to present to the group just a short presentation that would kind of serve as like an inspirational piece of this larger social that was really more about connecting with everybody. So during that first session, we had people introduce themselves, and later during the second and third sessions, what I started to do was I would share my screen and show their work while they were introducing themselves. I think that was kind of a nice thing to do because it helped to spark conversation in other ways as well. And I think that, not everyone is doing their homework of like researching and looking at these people before the social. So they have no idea who they're in the room with.
Yeah.
And I think just showing their work while they were introducing themselves was incredibly helpful in sort of establishing this baseline of like, hey, everyone here is incredibly talented. Like, you guys are like the best of the best right now. So, among the people that we work with. So everyone is here, like deserves an equal, seat at the table, right?
So it's interesting. What is, I guess, the goal or the overriding kind of purpose of this? Like what are you trying to do with the Lightroom community?
So that's a great question, and I'm glad we're talking about it because I think that I don't know if I get to talk about it often enough,
Yeah.
and really, Lightroom is a set of tools, right?
Yeah.
It's this editing program that isn't necessarily like traditionally hasn't really been more than that, right? It's obviously it's like obviously a lot of photographers utilize Adobe products, whether they be Photoshop or Lightroom, to edit their photos, um, but it hasn't really extended beyond that um, until now. So recently, more recently, we've been trying to figure out other ways to inspire and engage photographers, just to build, to help support and build the photography community and space and industry. So, you know, in product, we've added in-app tutorials and these what we are calling discover edits.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, you can go in. If you don't know how to use Lightroom, you can do these interactive tutorials, and that will help you learn not just what the tools do, but why you might want to make certain editing choices. You can watch these discover edits and see essentially like a time lapse of a person editing their photo, so you can see every step of the way,
Yeah.
and then walk through it step by step, so you can really dissect the way that somebody has edited their photo. And then we're building a community piece within the app itself. So, anybody utilizing Lightroom can share their edits with the world, because there are so many people doing these incredible things with our product that maybe don't get surfaced. We don't get to see them because there's no place for us to notice them. So we're encouraging people to share more within the app, but at the same time, so my objective is really, as the person engaging with the photography community outside of the app. So, hey, obviously Lightroom is built for photographers. It's built by photographers as well. But it's still really important for us to hear directly from the people who are like out there in the trenches utilizing our product. What is it that's important to them? How can we better support them? How, of course, like how can we make changes within the product to support them? But also like, what is it that photographers need as an incredible, like, I feel like we're, as like an editing, like a company that makes an editing tool, we're like one of the pillars or cornerstones of like the photography industry, right? Like
For
we're
sure.
incredibly important in the photography industry, but how do we engage more with photographers? How do we have face-to-face time? Um, how do we use our influence and resources to bring photographers together and make them better at what it is that they do, and therefore also by extension better the photography industry itself? So yeah, that's what I'm there to do. I mean, also just like, how do I utilize Adobe's money to make photographers and photography better and feel more supported?
I mean, it's happening. And if you are listening to this and you're not a photographer, I should give context in terms of like what Lightroom is to photography and the photography industry. So Adobe has this piece of software, and if you go back 20 years to, Pei, when you were first getting into photography, you mentioned being in a dark room, right? So most of us know what a dark room is. It's a small box of a room where you have chemicals and you bring your film in. It's dark so that there's no other light that could essentially kind of taint or ruin your film that you are running through the different chemicals to process. So photographers worked in a dark room. Now Adobe developed Lightroom, which there had to be a play on words there, but Lightroom was
Yeah.
essentially the desktop version of it is the digital darkroom. Lightroom is the digital darkroom. It's bringing everything that you would have done with chemicals, but now onto your desktop, and you're doing it with sliders and adjustments and tools on your computer. Now, what's been super fascinating is over the last year or so, maybe 2 years, the steps that you all have been taking, kind of, to me, it looks as though you've taken all of our darkroom boxes and basically put windows on them where we can all kind of see what the other person is doing. So we can now look kind of next door at our neighbors and say, hey, what is it that you're doing differently? How are you processing? How are you doing this kind of stuff? And it's the industry standard in this digital darkroom. So while there are other competing apps, Lightroom is really the digital standard in terms of like taking the darkroom and putting it onto a computer. So it's super exciting. It's exciting to see a group of creators like what we had. It's exciting to see these tools where now inside of the software, and I'm actually one of the ones that are creating some of these tutorials where inside of the software, I can go through a series of steps, and when the user opens it, they can follow my instructions, Pai's instructions on how to edit this image right there in the application. I've never seen anything like it. And honestly, I can't think of any other software that's building in community-based education like this. Is there any other, outside of
Yeah.
photography, is there anyone else that's doing this? Because I would imagine this is going to become a trend.
Outside, so no one else I can think of within photography is really tackling this in the way that we are. Outside of photography, I haven't thought too much about. Nothing stands out to me. So yeah, I mean, hopefully this is. I mean, I do feel like we're kind of pioneering this within software, learning within software in this way.
Yeah.
And I think it is one way that we really hope to tackle this idea of, as photographers, especially, so many of us are freelancers working in our own little silos where we don't really have a lot of interaction with other photographers, and we don't get to see the work that they do, and share our ideas and our own work. So I think it's, just one step that we're taking to bring people together, right? Like everyone's so separated, especially during COVID. We're all in our own little world. So how do we like utilize what we can offer to bring people together?
Yeah. Well, it's working. And I think it's a brilliant way of learning. I think honestly, in 5 to 10 more years, the concept of online education is once again going to shift very dramatically into, right now, online education by and large is kind of, buy a set of videos, watch the videos and follow along.
Yeah.
And I
Or just
see,
everything on YouTube, right?
yeah, or everything on YouTube. And the way that I feel like it's going is more like get a piece of software or get the thing that you want, and the education will naturally be built into it like it is inside of Lightroom. I can actually start seeing this now. Like my kids are doing Code Academy, and Code Academy is kind of like that, where you're essentially given a programming interface and you're giving lessons right next to it. But the difference is it's not video based. It's all text based, at least from the ones that I've seen. And there's kind of no hand holding. Coding is very difficult, and there's no hand holding in
Yeah.
the process. So like if you miss a little piece of syntax somewhere, you're kind of screwed, and it doesn't really help you with that process. But I was like, man, if what Adobe's done with Lightroom, if this were brought over to coding, a person can sit at home and have this guided experience learning how to do something where it'll actually tell you what's wrong with, this is what you're doing. And
Yeah, it's fail safe the
yeah,
way that the tutorials are set up. Yeah, like it won't let you progress unless you've done the right thing.
yeah. So it's exciting because as a lifelong learner personally, it excites me to be able to learn better. And I was like, if this existed when I first started my journey in learning Lightroom, it would have been overnight. I could have figured it out. Like I could have gotten to where I wanted to go, as opposed to like spending 6 months doing something, and trying and testing and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and the nice thing about it for us also is that we can essentially control the education that is released because, when it's just like every man for himself, posting YouTube videos and tutorials elsewhere, there's no guarantee that, you as a learner, when you go to Google something or YouTube something, that you're going to find somebody who actually knows what it is that they're talking about, or knows how
Yeah.
to teach it, or is actually a good photo editor, right? Like, you
Yeah.
don't want to learn from somebody who's a terrible photo editor. So at least this way, we as Adobe are kind of in control of the educational materials that are released. So that means that, as a learner coming in, that these are all high quality tutorials. We've vetted all the photographers who are coming in creating these tutorials. It's only the best of the best who are creating these things for us. So it's, just going straight to the source for your learning, which, feels really good to us. So I'm glad that's coming through, and it feels good to you as well.
It's awesome. I'm excited for everywhere it's going. I'm really curious. I know you're probably not allowed to talk about where Lightroom is going, but I am very curious where Lightroom is going, especially, right now we have two versions of the software, Lightroom versus Lightroom Classic. And it
Mm-hmm.
feels like it would only make sense for eventually everything to get merged together. Um, but yeah, it's a fun
Well,
time.
I mean, honestly, I can talk about that
Oh, can you?
because I
Yes.
can.
Let's talk about
because
it.
because there's no plan to merge them. They're always
Really?
going to, yeah. I mean, they're two different products for that serve two very different needs.
Yeah.
Um, but they have the same tool sets, right? So it's like they're the exact same product, but the kind of structure behind them, that goes on behind the scenes, and the way that you store your files either locally or in the cloud, all of that stuff is different, but the tools that you're using to edit the photos are all identical, right?
Yes.
So right now, the two are virtually identical. There are very few features in Lightroom Classic that are not in Lightroom, and there's a reason for that. So there's a reason one, as a photographer, might choose Lightroom Classic over Lightroom, or vice versa. And so we are not trying to dictate, which one you should choose. We just want to have the tools we want to have the tools that every photographer needs. So if you need what Lightroom Classic offers, use Lightroom Classic. It's not going away. If you want the tools that Lightroom needs, if you want the tools that Lightroom offers, use that. That's not going anywhere. We do feel like, Lightroom Classic as a closed ecosystem with clouds, or with files stored locally as opposed to in the cloud, is not necessarily where the future is going in terms of like image storage
Hmm.
and creation and like on the go creativity, like the importance of mobility and whatnot, so but we also recognize that there are many photographers who are still editing at home with their desktops, and they want their files stored locally and don't need to be mobile. They don't want to work on an iPad. They don't ever fly on they're not ever like in a situation where they're like needing to deal with client files on an airplane and that sort of thing. So for them, Lightroom Classic will always be the better solution, and that's totally fine. So, I mean, this is always a question, right? It's like, are they going to merge, or is one going to go away? Is Lightroom going to replace Lightroom Classic? No, the plan is not for that to ever happen. We still devote as many resources to Lightroom Classic as we do to Lightroom. Lightroom, it has just made a lot more progress comparatively because it's a newer product, right? So we
Yeah.
had a lot further to go with it. That's why so many newer features were coming, like bam, 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 one after the other. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I can say, I can't share any specifics about what's coming, but I know, like, there's definitely a huge emphasis that we're placing on community, both within the app and outside of the app, and the efforts that I'm doing. So, or I'm in charge of. So I think that that's something to kind of look forward to. Like, what is Lightroom going to do to sort of help build community through tools within the app itself? So it'll be interesting to see what comes in the next few years, because we definitely have like a longer term roadmap of the things that we're hoping we can release and share with you guys soon.
It's interesting given that plan that Adobe and the marketing team chose the naming structure of Lightroom versus Lightroom Classic. Could it almost Lightroom desktop
Mhm.
versus Lightroom mobile would have almost made more sense if both ecosystems were going to go forward.
Yeah.
But I think it
Well,
probably scared photographers quite a bit. I know it scared us, where it was like,
Yeah.
Uh-oh, is Lightroom going to be phased out?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, so Lightroom, the cloud-based ecosystem, the newer Lightroom
mhm.
has a desktop version as well. So we couldn't call it Lightroom
Oh,
Desktop
I
versus
see.
Lightroom Mobile
Yeah.
because Lightroom, the ecosystem, has a desktop version, a mobile version for tablet and iPhone, as well as a web version. So it really goes across all surfaces. So let me just say that it's not the Lightroom team nor the marketing team's decision what products get named. So
Interesting.
it is also very frustrating for us as well, because it's like, why do we have two products that are called basically the exact same thing? It's like makes our marketing and the way that we talk about it and message everything really, really difficult as well, right? It's just like
The
we
messaging
have
is a
to
little bit
work
difficult.
we have to work extra hard because of the naming that's been chosen. Um, but I mean, it's not entirely off base to have them both be called Lightroom because they both have the exact same features, right? They're the same product. We're just building them in slightly different ways for different surfaces
Yeah.
um,
It's
and whatnot.
interesting. I
So
mean,
yeah, it's strange.
I know there's plenty of people that are far smarter than myself at Adobe, so I'm sure all of this stuff has been thought through. But do you know, or do you have any inkling or idea, or can you talk about? Uh, do you feel like Lightroom Classic will at some point be rebuilt ground up? Because there's so many parts of the. I mean, all of us have kind of, as I would say, more so the professional photographers have always wanted to squeeze every ounce of performance out of the application possible, which is difficult when the code base has generations of updates
Mhm.
and everything on that. But we want to, the professional side, which probably isn't, I guess, I don't know what representative percentage we are of the user base of this software. So maybe it's not that many. We've
It's
always
high.
hoped for that. But there's also the side of like, there's just a lot of like I know in Lightroom, most of us are just in library and develop, and that's it. Like the only
Mhm.
two modules, but there's all the
Yeah,
other modules
exactly.
that kind of feel like we could just get rid of these and kind
Yeah,
of,
I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get rid of, it's like the print and the slideshow and the, what a book, web, whatever modules, map module, all those things. You're right. Like most people don't utilize those, but there's a huge percentage of our population, like user base who uses Lightroom Classic and are professionals. So
yeah.
you're certainly not like, um, you're certainly in a significant portion of the population, let's just say. But um, to answer your question, I'm not an engineer. I don't work on the product team either, so
Okay.
I don't I don't know all of the details behind what all goes on and happens in the code base, but I do know that. I mean, obviously, every time we have a new release, there are performance improvements. It's like what's stated in every
Sure.
update that we
Yeah.
do, performance improvements.
Yeah.
So I have been definitely in on enough meetings to know that the changes are going to happen, but they're going to happen gradually over time because we can't just like shut it all down and then
Yeah. It would
release it
be,
all brand new, right? So it's just like we're fixing the engine while the car's driving down the road, right?
yeah.
So that's kind of how it's working right now. So I know I've heard discussions and meetings about how we're making these performance improvements and making things faster and you know improving such and such things with so many letters that are used to talk about them that I don't understand, right? The acronyms for all of the code and everything that I don't know. Um, but we have an incredibly smart team. We have like the best engineers working on this. And so there's a lot of people dedicated to making it better for photographers. I mean, the cool thing about Adobe is that so many people who work there are like come from a photography background.
Yeah.
Um, but even if they don't, there's just so much pride that goes into the work that we put out that it kind of breaks my heart every time there's a new release and it just gets slammed for whatever reason, or like the only thing that people have to say is like, I can't believe Adobe and their subscription model. It's always people complaining about that, because it's like the amount of heart and soul that goes into creating Lightroom as a product is tremendous, right? Like there's so many people who love what they do, and they love the product. They want to make it the best it can be, and the fastest it can be, but there's, it just has to come in time, right? It's like, we all want to make it better too. We all want to make these changes. We get a lot of like, as somebody who works on the Lightroom team now, I get a lot of people who are like, oh, I wish Lightroom could do this, or like, oh, can you tell the team to do this? Or, oh, like, why can't we search by name, in like the tutorial section to find, like, I want to find your tutorial specifically, but I can't yet search for your name. It's like, we all know that, and we feel the same way, and we want the same things, but it just has to come in time. So I think for people who have those kinds of questions, I would just say, just like, have faith in us, have faith in our team, that we are going to create the best possible product for you. Even if it maybe just takes a while, right? There's a lot of stuff that we're working on. There's a lot of cool things coming up. So, stick around and you'll get to see them all. And hopefully we won't disappoint you, and we want it to be surprising and fun and exciting for everybody. So,
well, I mean, I will address, I feel like the naysayers, the people that kind of hate against Adobe products, generally have no idea what they're talking about.
Well, it's like they're not hating the products necessarily even. They're just hating the fact that there's a subscription model, right? It's just like,
why? Because they were the same ones that were ripping it off before. They were the same ones that were downloading it illegally. And like, I have no sympathy for those, because what Adobe has done, any respectable photographer knows what Adobe's done for the photography industry, and the two tools that we have that we use, Lightroom primarily, as well as Photoshop. I think those are available for, are they not $10 a month?
Yeah.
That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of, because when I was in college, I remember buying Photoshop cost like $1,200. Like Photoshop was $1,200. Lightroom was like $1,200. No, I think Lightroom was a little bit cheaper. It was like $300.
Yeah, and it came later, yeah.
And then you had to get like the updates and everything. So anybody that knows anything knows that $10 a month is absolutely nothing. And
it's nothing these days for creators. It's like 2 cups of coffee, right? It's like, I buy boba.
Yes.
I buy a cup of boba and it's like $7.50, and then I leave a tip, right? So it's, it's like 1.5 bobas for me. But the people who are complaining about the subscription model don't understand that it's because we want to constantly keep improving the product, and we want everybody to have the best version of the product all the time, right?
Sure.
If we were just releasing that one, like we used to, here's one version, you pay $1,200 for it, and that's all you get. And hey, when we make it better, you have to pay another, $800 or whatever to get the updated version of it. So we don't want that, because that's more of a ripoff in our eyes, right? We want you to have the best performance. We want you to have the newest features. We want everybody to be able to get them as soon as they're released. And the only way that we can do that is with a subscription model.
10,000%. And on top of that, I don't think people realize from an administrative standpoint what it's like trying to provide customer service on a product that could have 15 different variants. Like every different user has a different version of your software based on when they bought it. That is a complete nightmare. So I've always been like, from the point of teaching people on their phone, I'm like, look, if you like taking pictures on your phone, you already should be spending the $10. That $10 a month should just be built into your Netflix bill. Like everything else that you're paying for, like that needs to be part of it.
You're not complaining about Netflix and Disney Plus and Hulu and HBO and whatever, but like this thing that you need for your livelihood, suddenly you're pissed that you have to pay a very like nominal fee for. It doesn't.
So that side doesn't, the one side that like, I feel like photographers, they're more justified in speaking up is, their needs and their wants. But I think the thing that they miss out on is the fact that, if you're a new company and developing a piece of software, you don't have to take into consideration anything, anybody, you just build what you want from the ground up. But when you've got how many millions of people that are using an application that are depending on backwards and forwards compatibility, and they're depending on it from a livelihood standpoint, then like you said, repairing the car while it's running in and of itself becomes this massive undertaking, where occasionally you might even see like an update where it caused an issue, and Adobe's always really good about reissuing a new update to get it fixed. But like those are minor glitches, and I don't think people realize like what it's like. Like you can't. That's why I'm curious if it's even possible to do an overhaul, or if it just has to keep kind of going, and like you said, you just keep kind of making updates and gradual improvements as you go.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm not an engineer, I don't know the exact answer to that. I think that it doesn't make sense at this point to just
Yeah.
start brand new,
Yeah.
right? Because so much of it is already built. It's like we don't need to rebuild the car; we just need to replace parts of the engine.
Yeah.
So, I think I think they are going to, in whatever way they need to do it, repair that engine and make it all run better, but they're doing one part at a time so the car doesn't stop running, right?
Yeah.
That's how I understand it as my non-engineer, non-technical, non-product team in that brain.
No, I love it. And with this next generation of AI-based tools, I'm excited to see what comes from Photoshop and trickles into Lightroom, and what new things are on the horizon. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool working at Adobe because it's such a massive company and there's so many different products that even we are surprised every time there are new releases. We're like, oh, cool! I didn't know you guys were working on that.
Yeah.
So it's fun. It's fun to see.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you, my friend. I have taken up 2 hours. I've taken up 2 hours of your time.
Yeah.
I know you have a newborn that I'm sure you want to get back to. Actually, a 1-year-old that you need to get back to.
A mere 1-year-old. Yeah, I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do for his first birthday next week. But
I'm looking forward to seeing the pictures, whatever you do. And I think I can speak for the entire community that we hope you all keep posting new photographs to your Instagram page, your primary account. I love looking at them.
I will try.
An incredible photographer. The world will be a worse place if you are not sharing that with us. So thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It's been nice chatting with you as always. I have more questions and I could continue this for a while, but I think we should definitely sign off for now and continue later on down the road. Perhaps at our next Lightroom virtual social.
We will do a part 2 for sure. It'd be fun to have you back on in a few months and do a part 2 on the podcast. But in the meantime, is there anything that you would love the audience to kind of check out? We have your website up, but what other things might you point them at?
Can I promote a non-me thing?
Of course.
So I mentioned very briefly earlier that I run the Lightroom Ambassador program.
Yes.
So our first year was this past year, 2020, with a kind of pilot group of ambassadors. And one of the things that the ambassadors really wanted to do was to create a postcard pack that would help raise money for a photography-based nonprofit called 100 Cameras. So this postcard pack was finally released and is available now. And we're basically, all the images were donated by the ambassadors, and all of the proceeds of the sales of these postcard packs will be donated to 100 Cameras, which basically helps get cameras into the hands of young kids. So I love that. I would love for that link to get shared out. 100 Cameras is the nonprofit, and I can share with you guys the specific link to the postcard pack that the Lightroom ambassadors have put together and are selling.
That's so cool. Yes, we will include that in the show notes. So shoot that over to us. And thank you so much, Pei.
Thank you so much, Pi. It was great talking to you.
Okay, we'll chat soon.
Okay, bye.